One of the world's best-known architects, Frank Gehry, has died at the age of 96. He won international acclaim for his love of jagged angles and use of unglamorous industrial materials. His buildings include the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles and the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. The latter brought global attention and helped turn the Spanish city into a major tourist destination. Paul Goldberg is an author and architecture critic who wrote a biography on Frank Gehry, and he's been talking to me about his legacy.
You know, he was probably, first he was a great architect. He did extraordinary, brilliant, innovative work, but he's one of the only architects in our time, one of the few architects in modern times at all, who did important, innovative, creative work that was respected at the highest, most serious levels, and yet became incredibly popular. It was, and it's so rare in anything, in movies, in art, in theater, in literature, when the greatest, most complicated, most inventive work also becomes popular. That just doesn't happen very much. And it did with him. And so he was a really important figure in the architectural culture for that. And he wanted to find a way to bring the richness and the emotional intensity of great architecture of the past into the architecture of the present, but not doing it by imitating what had come before, just finding his own path, his own way to do that, but that would deliver that kind of really deep feeling and deep emotion that we have when you go into a great cathedral or some other great historic building.
How would you describe his style? What makes one of his buildings a Gehry building?
A Gehry building, first, they weren't always easy to characterize, and they're not all the same by any means, but what they shared, I think, is a mix of the most advanced technology. He used to say that his Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, which was created with a lot of software invented for airplane design, could not have been built in the age of the slide rule. It could not have been built without digital technology. So he was interested in being in the cutting edge, but he didn't want to do sleek, simple boxes. He wanted to do buildings that had a richness and complexity of form, and that would really be kind of art as well as architecture. And so I would say that the desire for space that would be complex and visually exciting and rich, using materials in the most interesting way, a mix of plain and lavish materials. A lot of his early work he did with plywood, but at the same time, he used titanium, one of the most rare and expensive metals in a lot of his work too, and bent things into beautiful, curving, rich shapes. So, it was architecture that was very sculptural, but it was not only art. He always understood the difference between art and architecture, and he knew that you also had to make sure the building didn't fall down. He knew that you had to have the right place for the toilets and the right place for the kitchen and if it was a house, the right number of closets and bathrooms and stuff like that. He didn't mind that. In fact, he thought the whole challenge was, how do you solve all those problems, but also make it a work of art at the same time?
And truly so many iconic buildings that many might consider works of art. And we know a lot about his work, his iconic buildings. What do we know about him? What kind of man was he?
Well,
You've spoken with him.
Yeah, he was a remarkable man because he had a deep connection to art. In his early years in Los Angeles, although he went to architecture school and got an architecture degree, he hung out with all the artists in the 50s and 60s when he was young and starting his career, not with other architects. They were the ones who influenced him most, and he felt more part of that circle. He had a very strong ego, but he was a gentle, easygoing person, and so that combination was amazing too. He had a soft, easy, relaxed manner. If you met him, you didn't think this was a world-famous architect. I remember I once described him as kind of being a mix of Frank Lloyd Wright and Woody Allen.
No.
It was a kind of sometimes almost nebbishy kind of just kind of guy, or shucks guy, and yet he was absolutely, driven and ambitious and committed and determined about his work, but he did it in a very gentle, almost kind, soft-spoken way. So it was a remarkable combination of qualities he had.